Greetings my fellow mushy globs of universe dust. My name's Hans, father of these plants, lord of the jungle dragon, obsessed with teal bricks, and berserk for Legos. This is the moment I've overhyped myself and all of you for an entire year. Welcome everybody to the very beginning of my Lego city, Paradisa City, a tropical city set 40 years into the future, in the year 2060. So grab your architectural sketch pad, put on your 3D goggles, and let's go city exploring. Onwards to the origin story. Just kidding. Not filmed in 3D, no 3D goggles needed. Although that would be a baseballs. And of course, a quick shout out to my very own channel, Teal Bricks and Paradisa. On November 20th of last year, I launched my very first video, the part 1 of the Paradisa City Hospital. And in honor of the 1 year, I made 2 mocks. My 1 year sign with trans neon letters, illuminated over there with a black light, and my new favorite Paradisa tree build. It's tropical, it's got teal, it's Paradisa-esque colors, aqua and spring green, and it also has 18 animals and 3 ladybugs. And I love it. Alright, so this is the humble beginnings of Paradisa City. Finally, after an entire year of me talking about it, and finally got it started. It may not look like much, but I am super stoked that it is gotten started. Alright, in the first part of this video, I'm going to talk about how I built tables. Yeah, how I plan to do elevations. Then I'll talk about the city itself, and what I've currently got. Some new techniques that I've developed specifically for my city, how I'm building the buildings as well as the subterranean area. And then last I'll talk about how it's going to evolve and how I will develop it over the next 12 months. So let's get going. Hey, one other thing to note is that if you're new to this channel, if this is the first time you're seeing a video from my channel, you might get a little bit lost in a lot of things I'm talking about as I go through the video, because this city is a city of the future and it's got ideas and concepts that I think are going to be happening in the future. I've talked a lot about it over the last year in a lot of my other videos, but there are 3 primary videos. Definitely go watch if you're a little bit lost in what I'm saying or some of the ideas and you want to know more on the details of that. I'll provide a link in the description as well as at the end of the video, or you can click on the link up here in the corner. But it's going to be the Lego road plates video, my Hyperloop video, and as well as my City Tables video. So don't be a noob, go check out those videos. Yeah! Alright, the first thing I want to point out is that I'm only starting with 4 tables. And if you remember in my table design video, I talked about there would be, all said and done, a total of 9 tables. So 3 this way and 3 that way. And that these tables would be 3 feet by 4 feet. So I don't need to start off with all 9 tables, since the city is only just beginning, and it's a lot easier to work on the city when there's less tables in my way. So that leads me to the other thing, and that is that in the original video I talked about these tables being 4 feet by 3 feet, and that got changed. It's actually 4 feet by 2 feet, actually less than 2 feet. So now that these tables are shorter by 1 foot, it makes it a lot easier for me to build the city and work on it and not have to reach so far across the table. But what does that mean? That means that now instead of 3 tables this way, it's going to be 4 tables this way. And we'll still have 3 tables going that way. So it's going to be a total of 12 tables now. So when Paradisa City is fully maxed out on all the tables, it'll be a total of 12 tables. As far as the overall dimensions of each table, I try to size these tables according to the nearest dimensions of Lego plates. And I was only somewhat successful, and that's just because all said and done, with all the building tolerances and all the cut tolerances of the wood pieces themselves, things don't line up exactly as you want them to, and because of that, the overall width and length are slightly off from my original plans. One of the first things was that this dimension here is 4 feet exactly, and that's because plywood in the United States is 4 feet by 8 feet. In order to cut these plywood, I had the hardware store do it for me, just because it's easier that way. But they weren't willing to trim off a 1/4 of an inch off the top of this 4 foot span, so I just left it at 4 feet. It just meant that the Lego dimensions of this table is 1 stud extra than I originally calculated. As far as the width, it's actually 3/4 of an inch less than 2 feet. So the width of these works out to be 4 of the 16 wide plates, plus an 8 stud wide plate, plus 3 studs. And then giving the building tolerances and the cutting tolerances, it's likely that these tables aren't going to be sitting perfectly up next to each other. There's going to be a little bit of gaps, and that my buildings will actually slightly overlap. Not super ideal. It's very hard to construct things in perfect tolerances, especially when you're working with limited tools and resources to build these things. But I'm not too bothered by it. I definitely think it's manageable. I don't need to have the tables sitting right up next to each other. Alright, and just as I said I would do, my table has 3 layers. So down here is the Hyperloop layer. And this bottom Hyperloop layer is just a thin piece of plywood. And then the next layer is the Hyperpod system. And up here at the very top of the table is where the city rises up from there. And again, the city has a basement level. And so as you can see, there's a few buildings that have basements, and there's a few buildings that are raised up on columns and beams. Alright, and for the table legs, they're just simple 2x2 timbers. And then for the plywood, I chose the very thin underlayment boards that are only 8mm thick. And of course this plywood is very thin and flimsy, and it comes with a lot of warps and bows in it, And so I had to put a vertical support beam to support this, because otherwise it would sag in the middle. Now these tables are slightly less than 2 feet tall, and the dimensions from this layer to this layer to this layer are the same, and I rounded it down to the nearest Lego plate. And here is my measurement tool that I used. And so each level is exactly 5 times the 6 brick tall window frames, plus an extra brick, plus 2 plates. And then, because in order to get access to the inner reaches of the city, these tables are designed to slide across the wood floor. And then what I've done is I've installed the little felt pads on the very bottom, and I've got one on each corner, and then I've got a couple in the middle. And so far, without any weight, these tables slide pretty nicely. Alright, so for the main structure I used screws, and that's so that these tables can be quickly disassembled if I ever need to transport them anywhere. And one thing that I did that was pretty unique for just the Hyperpod level is that it's actually not secured by any screws or nails. What I did was that on the support column, I notched it at a 45-degree angle, and then the plywood, the corners are also trimmed by a 45-degree angle. And then what I did is, as I was assembling this table, I slid this panel into the notch on each of the 4 corners, and essentially this panel is trapped. Now you notice I don't have any vertical support beam to support the bottom of this Hyperpod level, and that's because there's not going to be a ton of weight on there. But when I do start to build Hyperpod stations on this level, I likely will have to install a vertical support beam just like I did right here. And these are some of my tools that I was using to help build these tables. Oh, and one other thing to note is that these vertical beams provide a lot of stiffness to the table going in that direction. I don't have any vertical beams going in this direction. I have noticed that there is some sagging going on this way, but because I don't have a vertical port beam this way, the tables are actually pretty jiggly in this direction, but not so much that direction. So here you can see. But I think it's kind of cool because it actually gives me a chance to do an earthquake test on my Lego city. Let's watch the crane. Earthquake test! Yeesh. Those cranes are not the strongest. One of the reasons why I chose such a thin plywood was to just cut down on cost. This 4x8 feet sheet of plywood only cost about $30 versus about $50 for a piece of plywood that is a 1/2 inch thick. And even with a 1/2 inch thick, I still would have needed to do a vertical support beam. But overall, I'm pretty happy with how these tables have turned out. I'll basically learn a lot just from these first 4 tables, and then when it comes to building the remaining tables, I may adapt. Alright, for the next topic, let's talk about the terracing of Paradisa City. So rather than just building a city on a straight, flat, level table, I thought it would be nice to just do some mild terracing. And what I came up with is that the city at the very far back of the tables is going to be at the tallest of the terracing, which will be 6 bricks tall. And then each table after that will drop down 2 bricks. And so by the time I get to the last and final table, it'll just be flat plywood. Now, why did I choose 2 bricks per terrace? And that's because I discovered by chance that 2 bricks tall is very, 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 very close to 3/4 of an inch, which is a common lumber size. So this 1x3 piece of lumber is actually 3/4 of an inch thick. And so that means that I could build a terracing by using standard lumber dimensions, and that means I wouldn't have to spend a lot of time designing and cutting and building a custom height for this terrace just to match the dimensions of Legos. So here you can see that I'm using a 2x2 plus a 1x, and that matches up exactly to 6 bricks tall. Boom! I love that I discovered that because it just made things so much easier for me. And that explains why there's additional build structure up here on this table. And so as you can see, 3/4 of an inch is almost exactly 2 bricks tall. And of course, with the combination of the 2x2 and the 1x, it is almost exactly 6 bricks tall. And when you do the inches to millimeters conversion, it's not exact, and the difference is so small that it's negligible. The other thing to note is that this is a little bit too bare bones, and I will actually be replacing these thinner pieces with a much wider version of this right here in the center. And then also, when it gets time to expand to this table, I will be building up the terrace on this platform as well. Instead of a 2x and a 1x, it'll just be a couple of 1x's for this table. And then when I go to build the next table, it'll just be a single layer of 1x timbers. And the last thing to note about the terracing is that I'll likely end up doing more of a contour effect. So right now, I've got the entire back set of tables terraced up, but it could be that the corner tables are terraced taller, and then as I get to the outer edges of the city, it begins to drop down in terracing. It's not going to be this perfect linear. So depending on how I figure out the layout of where all the buildings are going to go, and what I think looks best as far as the contours of the terracing in relation to the buildings. So it could be that on other tables, the terrace will be 6 bricks tall, and then maybe right about here, it'll kind of ramp off that way and it'll drop down by 2 bricks in terrace. And that'll kind of give it a more natural landscape effect. All right, and another major thing to note is that you may notice that my tables are nice and square, but my buildings are not. They're off at an angle. Yeah, this might be a crazy decision of mine that I may regret later. It just kind of struck me that said, you know, standard grid layout is just a little too cliche. Why not throw a twist on this? So I went into the parts drawer and I went and found a bunch of Lego angles, and this Lego wing plate is the angle that I chose. So that's totally going to wreak havoc, especially when it comes to segregating the city from table to table, and especially when it comes to like sliding the tables apart and then moving them back together again. So I may totally regret this, and I may end up changing it back to a regular proper 90-degree angles. But for now, you know, I'm liking the slight twist. And that also means that I can make buildings that maybe are triangular in shape. Putting things at an angle is an inefficient waste of space. And all this time I've been saying how I was going to get really efficient use of space by not having regular streets and just having narrow walkable pathways. And yet here I've gone about and totally wasted a bunch of space, because where the city meets the edges of the tables, I'll have to find ways to build into these tiny little triangular pockets. And it could be that a section of my city is at an angle while another section of my city is at another different angle, or towards the coastline of the city. It'll go back to just being perpendicular to the tables again. So I like it. I like this dynamic angled look, and that's kind of why I did it. I like adding a little bit of dynamic shapes and positions to the city. And another thing too is I thought it might help improve camera angles for some of the cities. If they're kind of at a slight angle, I can get a better view of the front and sides of some of these buildings. And just a quick reminder, as far as the Hyperloop level, there's going to be a major cargo Hyperloop terminal station with a bunch of cranes and to lift cargo up off the cargo hyperpods. There's also going to be a passenger terminal station that's going to get built down here. And then the minifigures will have access to this level through a major elevator. There's also going to be a massive cargo elevator that's going to go up to the subterranean level, to distribution centers. I'm also going to need to build some warehouses down here in order for, to store a lot of the incoming cargo as it gets processed at the cargo terminal. Up here, about every 2 tables, I'm going to be building a Hyperpod station, and this is how citizens of Paradisa City are going to get around, by these Hyperpods. And then again, associated with that, I'm actually going to have an elevator for each of the Hyperpod stations. So I'll definitely be drilling some holes once the positioning of the buildings start to become more and more finalized, and I begin to build these stations. I'll be able to finalize the position of where those elevator shafts are going to go, and I'll cut a hole right into the top of the table right there, so that the elevator shafts can go right up. Alright, so let's talk about the subterranean area. This is where the autonomous roadways are, where all the autonomous vehicles and drone delivery, and emergency vehicles, and shipping and garbage, and basically all the city services, which are critical to the functioning of the city itself, are going to be zipping around in. And so a lot of my buildings are going to have basements, and if you've already seen my hospital video, you'll see that there was a basement in there, as well as my Grand Emporium video. But some of these buildings, a lot of these modular buildings, don't have basements yet. Maybe I'll add some more. So the height of my subterranean level is 2 times the 6 bricks tall, plus 1 extra plate on top. These do come apart in a modular fashion, so you can just lift the building right off of the top of this substructure. And I built these substructures with 2x2 brick columns. I've also got 1x16 beams, and every 16 bricks, you've got a column. And so here is one of the autonomous roadways. You got it kind of zipping along underneath there. And I actually had to build a tunnel right going underneath the corner garage and the Parisian restaurant for the autonomous roadway. Another thing to note is that I also think I'm going to end up having to raise this up by 1 extra stud. So instead of just having 2 of the 6 brick tall dimensions, I'll add 1 extra brick. And the reason for that is because some of these taller vehicles, like the shipping container, actually doesn't quite fit underneath that archway. And likely too for the garbage truck, which has a grabber arm that grabs garbage cans and lifts it up over the truck. I may need some extra clearance there. But I think this is even taller than, say, like the fire trucks and any other construction type trucks. And I think my Cargo Master crane should be able to fit in there. I have to test it out. And if you'll notice, there's no driver in there, and that's because at the moment this truck is on full autonomy mode. It is simply driving this shipping container from point A to point B. And of course, I'll probably also eventually be designing a cabless. In other words, it's just 100% drone. So there will be no passenger cabin there. It'll just be a pure semi-trailer towing drone. Alright, another awesome feature of my subterranean levels is these skylights. Yeah, so built into the base of all my buildings, I actually have transparent windows that go down to help illuminate inside of the autonomous roadways, and this will help with energy efficiency. So you can see one right there in front of the garage, and if you come over here, you can see that little window right there, and underneath is where the light comes through. So we've got more of those windows. Got a window right there and right there. So yeah, with every building on the sidewalks, there's going to be those little skylights, which light pipe, and that'll help cut down the cost of electricity in having to light up these tunnels. Now in real life, I don't think there's enough ambient light inside this room to really make a difference for a light to get through and actually bring a lot of light inside of here. But I'm super excited to just incorporate the concept, and I know it'll work just a tiny bit. Alright, another thing I'm thinking about doing is running a bunch of fairy string lights down through these autonomous roadway tunnels, just so they can be illuminated. Now when I get more and more buildings in here, there really isn't going to be any way to see inside of these autonomous tunnels, but I am thinking about some sort of way to kind of run a camera down through there. I've already got a couple of ideas which I think are kind of, which I think may be promising. But if not, you know, I don't mind. I don't mind the fact that I can't see down into the tunnels. I know they're there. I know they're awesome. And yeah. Speaking of lighting, you see that light illuminating the wall in the back there. I just got a quick light bulb right there. But what I plan on doing is running a strip of LED lights that are colored along the back there, so it can illuminate the wall back behind the city, and I can give it, you know, a bunch of sunset colors like oranges and blues and magenta colors, which I think would be really awesome, illuminating this whole back wall behind the city. So I'll likely have something installed by the next city update. Alright, and the last major topic that I want to talk about today is the template structure for the base of all the buildings. So one thing that I said I would do in my previous videos is that the buildings would just stick to their 32 by 32 base plates, and that I would just kind of hang the roads between the buildings. But as I got to putting together this city, I realized I could probably do a little bit better, and that by incorporating these walkable pathways into the base structure of the buildings themselves, it would be a lot easier for me to assemble the city and put it together that way. So I'm going to start talking about my template. Alright, back to the tripod, so the microphone is practically in my mouth, and you guys can hear me spit into it with all my P's and T's. So here is the new template that I've created for all my buildings, and that's what really took me an extra long time to start putting Paradisa City together. Is I literally had to take the floors of all these buildings apart and redo them in my new template format. So previously all my buildings were just built on the 32 by 32 base plate, and then now I've gotten rid of the base plate itself and they're just on 16 by 16 plates, but I've now incorporated the sidewalks into the actual structure. So kind of think of it as like my own personal Mills style foundation for all my buildings. And before I had said that I would just have the buildings on their own foundation, and then that the walkable pathways would just kind of be their own entity, and then I would just kind of drop them down in place between the buildings, and then that they would be suspended on the foundation of the buildings through the use of these bricks that would stick out. And if you watch my Grand Emporium video, you'll see those bricks that are kind of sticking out of the foundation. I realized that they would be a little bit more efficient if I just incorporated the walkable pathways directly into the foundation of the buildings themselves. So here you go, that's the gray outline is where you'll see the city. You can also see my lantern up there, up on the ceiling. By the way, that lantern is supposed to represent kind of like the sun, a giant sun-emitting globe for Paradisa City. Yeah, might be a little too close to be a sun, but the sick pigs don't know that. I'm just kidding. I'm basing this off of reality, so this is definitely not the sun. Okay, and here you can see the skylights that are going to transmit the sunlight down into the subterranean level. So I'll flip this over, and this is my template structure. It's nice and solid, it's structural and it's sound. So what I'm doing is that I've got 1x bricks here, and then they're sandwiched between the floor plates and then these bottom layer of plates. And this all adds strength and rigidity to the whole system. It would add a little bit more strength and rigidity if it was fully connected over to this structure as well as over there. For the walkable pathways or the sidewalks, I've got a 1x16 beam that's cantilevered all the way out there. Now, one thing to note is that this is just a template, and it actually gets customized per building. So depending on the building and how wide I want the walkable pathway to be, that will vary. The other thing too is that it'll vary depending on whether this is a corner building or not. So I may end up having just one side and maybe even just the back side where it is built with this template structure. So I've got these 1x bricks that extend out and cantilever to support the structure of the walkable pathways. So that includes these white bricks, these other gray bricks. And then when it comes to corner buildings or walkable pathways that wrap around the corner of a building, I've built a special cantilevered setup that's strengthened by this particular plate that helps support the structure of this corner right there. And so it's nice and solid. Yeah. And then the other unique feature that I've got going on here is the skylights. So I'm using a bunch of trans clear bricks, and there's a couple of trans clear plates. And of course, at the very top where the walkable pathway is going to be tiled over with, I've got a trans clear plate right there. Now in this particular instance, it's just trans clear, but I'm also using the trans light blue tiles and bricks there. So if I get out the flashlight on my phone and I shine it right there, you can see that the light shines through. So actually it should be the other way around. It'll be a light that's coming from above and can shine down through there. And actually, if I'm running a bunch of fairy lights down through the autonomous roadways, it actually will kind of have the opposite effect, where those lights will actually shine up through the skylights and kind of help illuminate my city at night. So because of these skylights, this is actually an odd number of studs for this walkable pathway. And in order to build these, I'm using these 16 long plates. So the 16 long only comes in 8x16, 6x16, or 2x16. In other instances where I want to use even less than that, I'll use 4x8 plates. Having the 16 plates here, but then also having the single row of studs right there so that I can build these skylights. So if I take this off right there, you can basically see the skylight is right there. The other fun part about this too is that the skylight also is open to inside of the building. So if there's a basement here, light that's coming from above, not only shine down into the autonomous roadways, but it'll also illuminate inside the basement too. So there you have it. That is my template that I've been building. And that's kind of what took me an extra long time. I've been working the last week and a half solid. And as I was taking apart a lot of the foundations on these modular buildings, and even the hospital, I had to rebuild that. I was also kind of going through and making a lot of tweaks and improvements to a lot of the different buildings. And one of the tweaks and improvements that I started working on is the stained glass window on the top floor of the Parisian restaurant that I had added originally. But originally it was all flush. And one of the comments by White Rabbit was that it looked a little too ordinary being flush. I totally agreed with him. So this is kind of what I came up with. I'm not quite happy. I think I'm going to try to recess the stained glass again now, but leave the white framing protruding out. But I think it looks a lot better with three-dimensional details, whereas before it was all completely flush with the building. And I think I'm going to try to invert this black railing decor. I have no idea if this is actually French looking, but yeah, I just think it looks a lot better given that it now has some three-dimensionality to it. Yeah. Okay, another thing to note is that this layout that I have right now with these buildings is going to change. It's not final. As I begin to incorporate more and more buildings in here, a lot of these modular buildings are actually going to come forward. And this very back row is just going to be filled with skyscrapers. I've got about, I think, 5 more skyscrapers planned to build up. So this layout is not final. In fact, this Grand Emporium will likely end up moving over to where this Palace Cinema is eventually in the future. And about a year ago, I already started on my apartment complex skyscraper, and that's what this construction site represents right here. This is the basement area of that apartment complex. So I started it, and I've got majority of the floors already developed. There's no interior at the moment. There's still a ton of work to do on it. but it's the basic structure is there, it exists. That's my next major focus, is to get that apartment building finished. And speaking of construction sites, I just want to say that I got a little bit of inspiration from Tayshawn Harris's latest video on his hospital construction site. And these little rebar pieces sticking up out of the cement columns, I got that idea from him. So thanks, Tayshawn. Totally awesome. And one other thing to note is that this tower crane is still a work in progress. I haven't finished building it. There's still some features that I'm still trying to work out and then some improvements that I want to do. But when I do, I'll make a full video on this tower crane. The other thing to remember is that off in this corner, when I build this final table, all these tables are going to move that way. And on the final corner, there's going to be a massive cliff wall, and there's going to be a waterfall off in this corner. The waterfall that's going to be over there, there's going to be a major river that's going to flow off over there. But I do want to add a bunch of smaller channels of water, or little rivers. And this right here is just a proof of concept. I'm definitely not going to use these blue plates for actual rivers, but it was just kind of a proof of concept. That's why it's a very unfinished look. But I just wanted to see what it looked like. I kind of like it. Alright, so let me give a quick overview of each of the buildings. Yeah. Okay, so this is going to be my skyscraper apartment building, which is still in progress. It's actually going to be similar in size to the hospital, but it's actually, so it's going to be 48 studs in length, but the width is less than 48 studs. And so the basement is actually a 32 by 48, but the building above ground is going to be slightly wider than what you see on the basement. Then we've got my Paradisa City Hospital, 9 stories tall. Definitely go check out the video on that. One of my popular videos. My newest building, which is my Grand Emporium mock. We got a banana bread bakery down there. We've got an art print shop. We've got an art gallery. We've got a pottery store, and we've got a plant store that goes up onto the roof. And then my Puma suede shoes. And we've got a corner garage with this luxury apartment that takes up the top 2 floors, and the veterinarian, and the electric scooter repair shop. We got the Parisian restaurant, which has been expanded. The second floor is an Airbnb, and there's a painter, a painting artist, who actually runs the art gallery on the Grand Emporium. So here you can see the Airbnb right there. Got some more tropical trees. There's just going to be trees and plants everywhere. We've got the Brick Bank, which was converted into the Vault nightclub. So it's got some dance floors on the bottom, including a dance floor inside the actual vault itself. There's a mezzanine up there with some VIP tables. And then we've got the rooftop dance floor. We got a rooftop bar over here with an elevator for the Palace Cinema. We got a bigger theater room with a bigger screen. And there's my 6-step wide limousine. Definitely go check out the video on that one. With a movie actress. We've got Tayshawn Harris here chasing after the metallic gold car because he's trying to claim dibs on it. But this lady actually owns the vault. And we've got, oh, there's me celebrating my 1 year. And we've got a little stream going on right there. Definitely looking forward to putting some little miniature waterfalls all throughout my city. And we've got the autonomous roadways. We got emergency service vehicles, we got delivery drones, we got police vehicles, shipping vehicles, more delivery drones. There you have it. We also have my eVTOL medevac. I really like that. And expect a video of the tower crane. Hopefully soon. Oh my god. Alright, that pretty much wraps it. You can always tell my voice is kind of dying on me because it starts to get all constricted and hoarse sounding. It makes me sound like an old dude. Not cool, man. But yep. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you think I'm crazy, think I'm psycho, hit the like button, give me a thumbs up. If you like the city, hit the like button, give me a thumbs up. If you just want to see some cool Hyperloop stuff, give me a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, you should definitely subscribe. So that's it, guys. This is just the very scrappy beginnings of Paradisa City. Stay tuned for more, and I'll check y'all later. Alright, alright, alright. Bada boom, bada bing. Welcome to Paradisa City.